was 7th.
The 7th?
No, since '95, so it's actually just starting on 6th.
Just starting on 6th, right?
Right.
Right. Okay.
Check. This is water, right? We're drinking.
Yeah,
it's a long time. We'll put it that way.
Now, so that's 6 or 7 years in John's world. That you guys have been together, but the schedules have got to be kind of grueling. Because, like you say, you're not a morning person. You guys are getting up. I don't know what time you're getting up to get to the radio station.
I'm up at 4:20.
And what time do you go on air?
I'm up at 2:55.
Yeah.
2:55.
Yeah.
Now, where do you live?
Forest Park.
In Vermont.
Vermont.
That's why he gets
Yeah.
up so early. Yeah. He's that guy in Vermont that has to come down.
I mean, I wake up earlier than John does because, I mean, I've got the view from the couch to write before before the show starts.
I have nothing to do.
He has nothing to do.
Just have
I
to
mean,
be
he has
there.
to read the newspaper.
You guys go on air at 5?
5:30.
So 5:30 to 10.
Yes.
That you're there. So I mean, that alone has got to be kind of a grueling schedule, because I'm certainly not the kind of guy that can get up every morning and then be as bright-eyed or at least sound it on the radio.
Well, neither do we.
Yeah.
No
You
kidding.
haven't heard every show, have you?
Yeah, obviously I'm not up listening at that point.
It's actually quite easy to fake being wide awake.
Yeah.
It really
A
is.
lot of music being played in the early morning.
Yeah, well, you mentioned, even before with the timeline, I mean, the entertainment value of the show is strongest between 6 and 9. Between 5:30 and 6, it's still pretty music-oriented from the overnight, and at 9 it becomes more so again. So that we're packing as much of the show as we can between 6 and 9. But still, from an entertainment standpoint, 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. I mean, guys like Jay Leno, David Letterman, these guys do it 1 hour a day. We're looking at 3 hours.
Yeah.
And you're about the same salary as Jay Leno and those guys.
We're probably closer to Conan O'Brien.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even what Conan makes in a week.
Yeah.
Yeah. But now you say you come in, you've got to do your view from a couch, because I listen to that, and you do a couple during the whole broadcast.
I write 2 every morning.
And so you pick kind of the flavor of the day, whatever it might be, and run with it?
I go on the computer when I wake up, and I'll eat breakfast in front of the computer, and I'll just, print out stories that I think might be worth looking at again, and then when I get to work, I make my final decision what stories I want to do, and then I start writing, and by 5:30, I'm done. And
but there's got to be those days where you're just like, I can't think of anything to write today, and why
fortunately, well, yeah, there are those days, but fortunately there's enough going on in sports where somebody is about to get arrested, somebody is about to do something stupid, or Yankees and Red Sox to talk about. There's always something I can usually find a hook on.
Right, but to make it comical and also newsworthy too at the same point is a challenge.
Oh yeah.
Is it something that you started on your own?
I've been doing this since I've been working in Milwaukee. Pretty much the same thing since. Well, I started doing this kind of sportscast since 1991. So I've been doing this kind of thing for a long time. So I'm almost at the point now where a lot of these stories write themselves, but there's a certain word economy that I can choose that winds up being pretty similar day after day.
Yeah.
And it's true, it does. I've oftentimes wandered up into the office where he does it, and his hands aren't even touching the keyboard, and yet the buttons are all depressing themselves.
This
So
one's
they
by
do
mind
actually
control.
write themselves and print themselves as
Yes.
well.
At this point, you could probably use the same stories you used in Wisconsin because nobody has heard them yet. So
True. I just have to change Packers to Patriots.
Sure.
I'm all set.
Well, that's one thing. When you first came here, and you still are a big Packers fan, you've certainly made no secret of it. That what was it, the Falls Pub out there in
Beautiful South Hadley,
Hadley, Massachusetts, where you used to spend when the Packers were on the top, and so that's one of your traditions you brought over from Wisconsin, is being the Packers fan and holding it here.
Well, I didn't start off that tradition. I mean,
yeah.
there were Packer. In fact, my first week here, some guy calls me and says, "Hey, are you a Packer fan?" I'm like, "Yeah." I said, "Well, there's a Packer bar in South Hadley." I'm like, "You got to be kidding me." So I went, and he said, "Well, it's the NFL draft this week. Why don't you come on over?" And I figured, well, what am I going to do? So I went, and I wanted to have a great time. And there was like a ton of people there for NFL draft day. Well, nobody around here in New England has ever paid attention to draft day in the NFL, but all these Packer fans, like they would in Wisconsin, were there.
Yeah.
So for the first couple of years we were there, we were here, we went. Of course, with a baby, my wife being pregnant, going to a bar wasn't first on my mind.
Right.
Although that is where the child was conceived.
Really?
During
Yeah.
halftime of the game.
Well,
Well,
you know,
as soon as Desmond Howard caught that pass,
you want to celebrate in a big way, don't you?
Now, that's one thing that you both do on the radio. You kind of open up quite a bit about your personal lives.
Yeah.
And you, John, especially, you've been sober now for a certain amount of years, and
6.5.
and you make no secret about it that you know you did have a drinking problem at
Yep.
one point, and probably maybe you lended to you being fired at one point.
Well, actually, thankfully, it never had a direct effect. I can't say that it didn't indirectly affect my personality and my ability to deal with people. The part about, and I battled with that for a long time. Not the problem, but whether or not I wanted to make it public. And the truth is, as I was able to learn as I got sober, you're the last person to know you have a problem. Everybody else is already aware of it. And between the promotions and the appearances and the shows that we did that oftentimes centered around alcohol, it became apparent to me that this isn't going to surprise anybody who's really been paying attention to the show. So, yeah, when I decided to get sober, I not simultaneously. I mean, I waited, you know, unlike the NFL players and the pro athletes who immediately get sober and then create foundations.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure that I had a foundation to my sobriety first, and that it was going to. You can never predict the success of it because there's no guarantees it's going to last forever. But I at least wanted some time under my belt so that I wasn't going on the air talking about it and then a week later relapsing. So I waited for a certain period of time before I decided to make it public, and I was comfortable with the way I handled it. I was extremely comfortable with the way other people handled it. You know, nobody handled it. Nobody, the stigma that's oftentimes attached wasn't apparent. I got full cooperation from management on trying to deal with it. And, you know, as far as speaking about it is concerned, for as anonymous as many of those kinds of places are supposed to be, obviously when a guy who's on TV, even cable access, and billboards walks into those rooms, he's instantly recognized. So, you know, I wasn't necessarily hiding anything from anyone anyway. But by dealing with it honestly, I felt that would be better than allowing the people who know to begin creating their own rumors and allegations and stuff like that. And to be perfectly honest with you, I've been very comfortable with it. I mean, it's never been a problem. You know, some people fear, well, what happens if I relapse? And I've just spent 5 or 6 years talking about it on the air. Won't I look like a fool? You know, that's the kind of thing that you have to deal with when it happens, if it happens.
Well, you do certainly seem to be very comfortable with your decision and kind of where you are at this point in your career, and because you do talk about it and you joke about it quite a bit.
Well, I don't think I would be where I am in my career if I hadn't dealt with it.
Yeah.
There was a part of me that was concerned when I decided to start dealing with it that I might lose my edge, that there was something in that personality that provided me with the success that I've been able to have on the air. But I realized the need to deal with the problem was far greater than whatever kind of entertainment benefit I was getting from it. So I decided to do something to help myself. That hasn't taken anything away. There was never a noticeable decline in my performance as a result of getting sober. So that's no longer an issue.
Right. So, like I said, your personal lives do come into your professional life on a regular basis as well, and we kind of did the same thing with you and with your wife being pregnant and the whole. I think you actually did a remote broadcast from the hospital room. I think the day that the baby was born.
Well, I think I just.
Or you had a cell phone.
I had the cell phone.
But you were on air actually while your wife was had already given birth.
Yeah, and you know, fortunately, I think my wife and John's wife are used to that kind of open display of our personalities in our lives. So there are no issues with that. But yeah, that was one of those things where it was, you know, I felt comfortable talking about it, and I had to tell John that it wasn't going to be in anyway, and and all that. So
I think the best connection you can make with your audience is by opening a door or a window to your personal life. Because as we talked previously about acting, acting is not going to cut it when it comes to the person that you're being on the air. We allow these real situations in our lives, whether they be childbirth or sobriety, to be able to put it on the air and have fun with it, as opposed to making it the dark issue that some people might look at it as being. Obviously, I'm not talking about childbirth there, but if you open up your own life and you're honest about it, it makes people want to listen, because we're not experiencing anything that hundreds and thousands of other people aren't on a regular basis as well.
And honestly, that's more interesting to listen to for the person at home or in the car than the guy who is on the air. And there's a style of radio that many of us call puking, and basically what that means is everything is contrived, everything is superficial, and there's really no humanness to their presentation. It's just hey, it's 7:50 in the a.m. everybody. I mean, we don't do that.
Right.
We don't do that unless we're just joking around.
Right.
But there are guys who have made careers out of
Casey
Kasem.
Kasem.
Casey Kasem is a perfect example of that. I mean, he was very successful at that. But who can honestly sit here and say, I listen to Casey Kasem because I find him so infinitely fascinating? There's not that many people.
And the other thing is, oftentimes the format will dictate that style as well. As it turns out, classic rock is a I mean, I'm right smack in the middle of the demographic that we're speaking to. I mean, we're basically talking to 25 to 54-year-olds. I'm going to be 40 in 2 weeks. The classic rock format allows that personal, driven kind of a show, as opposed to the pukers, who are generally on your top 40 stations and even your AC stations on occasion.
Well, you seem to pride yourself sometimes on having that timing sometimes of being that puke broadcaster.
Because I was one.
And catching catching it just before the song just starts.
I'm the postman.
Yeah.
Because that was how I began my career. I was a disc jockey whose job was to meet the posts and always be talking over music. You were never supposed to be talking with dead air underneath you. It was always over the trail of one song or the intro of the second song. And that was the way I was brought up in this business. To make sure that your timing is right.
That is interesting. Now, you mentioned earlier about being recognized and getting out in public and having people, I mean, obviously, we hear, if you were behind me in a grocery store, I'd recognize a voice like that because your voices are, they lend themselves to radio, but having your pictures all over bulletin boards now, you must be recognized kind of wherever you go. And does that become bothersome or an annoyance in any way, or is it just kind of part of the gig?
It makes me, I think it makes me feel a little more uncomfortable than it does John. I mean, John's a hometown guy. There's a certain pride of him growing up here. But for me, it's kind of like, the first time you see your face up on something, it's kind of cool. It's kind of an ego stroke. But after like the 10th time, you go, gee, I'd really like to go to Big Y wearing, without wearing a shirt.
Yeah.
Well, I can't feel comfortable ever doing that, because...
And thank God for that.
I know, but there are certain... I mean, I almost have to be aware of where I am and what I'm doing and what's in my shopping cart. And I'm not complaining. I mean, I'm very, grateful for what has happened in Springfield. But there's something a little intrusive about it at times.
I enjoyed it in the very beginning because it was a great way to get chicks.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. You'd have to beat them off with a stick.
I see. I haven't found that yet with cable access.
Well, it'll happen for you.
Well,
Don't worry.
so.
It's slower, but it'll happen.
May you one day get the good looks that you
have. Yeah, when you look like this, 28-foot noses on billboards really come in very well. I don't. There are times where I don't like it. I mean, if we go somewhere, my wife and I go to dinner or somewhere romantic or just to get away, there are occasions where it can be a bit intrusive. But for the most part, most people are very well mannered about it, because I know when I walk into a room, you can feel the heads turn and you can hear the whispering and you can sense the pointing and that kind of stuff. But 90% of those people will never approach you. They'll just watch from afar or whatever, because let's not be too egotistical either. We're not going to assume that every one of these people like us. They may recognize us, but they may not like the show. But most of them will keep their distance, and that's nice.
And some of them will actually go out of their way to say how much they dislike
Yes, occasionally that'll happen also. But I chose to do this. This is what I wanted. This is what I like. What occasionally happens that I think is a little more disconcerting is that, as Bax said before, our wives are on the show occasionally. And my wife will sometimes go places and be recognized as John O'Brien's wife. And that's not necessarily what she was buying into when we met, although